Hey everyone, Crisis here, and today I have Key Issues Garrick.
What's up, everyone?
And today we're going to talk about a topic that certainly has been discussed its shareful of times. That is the 3 cinematic Spider-Men seen in No Way Home versus 3 of the live-action Batman throughout the character's various film appearances. Batman versus Spider-Man is probably one of the go-to versus matchups, and in the case of the movies, it's pretty obvious who we would use for Spider-Man, seeing as they do all cross over in No Way Home. But as far as the Batman are concerned, we're going with some of the more modern iterations, so that includes the Christian Bale version of the character, Robert Pattinson, and Ben Affleck. They as well present the most interesting matchup to the Spider-Men.
And just to clarify on the Spider-Man, we will be using Tom Holland's Spider-Man from the MCU, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man from the Amazing Spider-Man series, as well as Spider-Man from the 1978 Japanese Spider-Man.
So the way that we're going to go about this is basically look at the character's strength, speed, intellect, some of their skills that the other character may not possess or have an advantage towards, and ascertain from there who would most likely win against the other more times than not. I think most people would agree off the bat that the Spider-Men have a pretty clear advantage, but with that being said, I think there's a lot regarding these characters and their power scaling that people probably don't assume or know about if you just look at the surface level. So for starters, why don't we look at the first Batman up on the list, that being the Christian Bale version of the character.
Yeah, so it's interesting with this version of the character because he's not limited to just the 3 movies that people think about. There's also the animated feature that happens between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, which we also need to consider. And a lot of his feats really come from that animated version, but it is canon. I mean, it has the same producers as the films. It was always intended to be set in that universe, so I think it's valid to use. But in terms of like AP, this Batman is gonna be around wall level. We see Bane is able to like shatter pillars with his punches, and we have that calc to about wall level. If we use his explosive batarangs from the animated feature, which I just mentioned, he gets up to small building level, so a lot stronger with his various gizmos and gadgets.
So a lot stronger than this Batman likely is in terms of his own physicality. So again, just with his more high tier weapons, he gets into the small building range, which doesn't necessarily mean that he could blow up a small building with a batarang, just that the energy in his explosive batarangs are equal or relative to the amount of energy that it would take to destroy a small building. And the same can be said for pretty much all of these characters. Just because I say they're building or wall doesn't mean they could just completely destroy one.
Yeah, and Batman isn't just necessarily limited to the batarangs. He has a lot of other gadgets, as we mentioned, that could be very, very useful throughout the fight, such as knockout darts. And of course, he has regular batarangs, he has smoke bombs, things like that, EMPs where he can turn the lights off. Although how relevant that will be in a fight against the Spider-Men, it remains to be seen. Of course, they all have their spider sense, but I think the most interesting aspect is really how each of these characters is going to adapt and react to the other mid-fight.
A big factor, and I think a big hurdle for the Batman when it comes to combating the Spider-Men, is speed. Not necessarily how fast they can run, but the stimuli in which they'll be able to react to. So quick muscle fiber type movements like punching and dodging, because as we've seen, pretty much all 3 of the Spider-Men do at this point is they can all dodge Electro's lightning, which lightning moves at massively hypersonic speeds. It's around Mach 1400, and they all do it in No Way Home. Like I said, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man does it all throughout his movie. Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland pretty soundly scale to Andrew Garfield, certainly in terms of speed. So especially compared to the Christian Bale version of the character, which has a couple of contentious bullet dodging feats in the movies, but pretty blatantly in the Batman Begins video game, which is interesting to consider. It's definitely interesting too that where it comes to speed, the Spider-Men certainly have a pretty considerable advantage, definitely against the Christian Bale version of the character. In terms of skill, I would go as far to say that the Christian Bale version of Batman is probably the best fighter out of the 3 Batmen.
He is a master of a plethora of different martial arts, but we do see this Batman go on his sort of world trek journey, and he's trained by the League of Shadows, and he also goes and does some other training, which we see depicted in the animated feature, where he goes through a whole process of resisting pain. And essentially by the end of that training, you know, he's sitting on beds of nails and can touch fire, etc., walk over hot coals. So by the time of The Dark Knight, he really doesn't feel pain. Although he reacts to painful situations, he can sort of ignore it most of the time.
Even at a low end, we see that in Age of Ultron, Captain America is able to completely demolish a similar concrete pillar by hurtling Ultron through one in that movie. And then later on, Spider-Man in the MCU, pretty much the weakest version of Spider-Man, he gets stronger throughout Homecoming. He gets more high-tech and more durable suits throughout his series until No Way Home. So this is a vastly inexperienced and earlier along in his power progression version of the character is able to pretty casually halt Winter Soldier's strikes, which should be stronger than Captain America himself as seen in Civil War. So that being said, the feat with which Captain America destroyed that pillar, which is obviously just visually far more impressive than what Bane was able to do, is actually calculated to be within the range of those explosive batarangs we mentioned from Gotham Knight. We know that, you know, characters like Captain America can certainly outmaneuver Spider-Man. And again, while he does improve, we never really see him prove himself against another martial artist of Captain America's caliber. So I think it's safe to say that for this Christian Bale Batman, he certainly is more skilled than probably any of the Spider-Men as far as a martial artist is concerned. We've never really seen any of the movie Spider-Man do anything like he does in the comics, like the Way of the Spider. We can't really assume that the movie versions have that ability, as the comics and movies differ in a lot of different aspects when it comes to the lore. The strength gap is simply too large, even at a low end, but just being conservative here, there's really not much the Christian Bale version of Batman can do against, again, even if it were a 1v1 any of the 3 Spider-Men. His best chance would honestly be using those knockout darts we mentioned earlier, because as we see in Spider-Man 1, Tobey Maguire is actually affected by knockout gas. We never really see him or any of the other 2 Spider-Men deal any differently, so we can only assume that it would still affect them. But the speed gap, again, we have questionable bullet dodging in the movies compared to the Spider-Men just outright dodging lightning and keeping up with people who can blatantly dodge lightning as well in the movies themselves. There's really not much he can do there, unfortunately. He's a much more tame version of the character, considering he kind of only ever fights jacked up mercenaries rather than outright superhumans.
Yeah, and you could pretty much say the same for the Robert Pattinson version of Batman. We'll call him the Batman when we refer to him during this video, I guess. He's about wall level as well. He's going to be in the similar range of Christian Bale's Batman in terms of martial arts ability, of course, but we've yet to see just how incredibly skilled Pattinson's version of the Batman is. But it's a relative number of martial arts that he knows based on statements as well as Robert Pattinson's actual training. He's got batarangs, he's got smoke bombs, small explosives, which probably aren't going to be anywhere near the previous Batman's abilities, and he has, of course, the adrenaline shot. So he's sort of in the same boat as Christian Bale's Batman, but Batfleck poses a much different threat and a much bigger threat to the Spider-Man than I think anyone watching this video would assume.
Batfleck is just on a completely different level. He himself, just outright with his own physicality, is able to perform feats that are within that range of heavy explosives, such as in Batman vs. Superman, in armor that was actually stated by Zack Snyder to not really make Batman any stronger, just make him more durable.
The mech suit doesn't really make him stronger necessarily. We don't really show that, but it does. It's more armor in case Superman hits him.
He was able to sling Superman through 4 concrete pillars. It's kind of funny that concrete pillars have been a solid metric for us to use here throughout this video, but Batfleck launches Superman through 4 of them, pretty much back to back to back. The energy required to do that is around 600 million joules, so actually in an even higher range than Captain America launching Ultron. I'm not saying he's stronger than Cap or stronger than Ultron, but that feat in specific Batfleck actually outperforms on screen.
Yeah, and this is 600 million joules compared to like 260,000 for The Dark Knight. And again, the Batman is in a similar realm as The Dark Knight. So there's just a massive difference in overall strength. And as Crisis mentioned, that's literally without any power boosts at all. Like, just to emphasize this point a bit more, the suit does not make him any stronger. Like, Zack Snyder just blatantly states that. So it's just a durability boost. Batfleck is going to give the Batman a much better chance. But if we get into speed, things get a lot crazier. In the Justice League, he's able to react to the Flash.
They can fly, travel at the speed of light,
and save him from falling. And then he also is able to react to heat vision and other things during the battle. And parademons, obviously, he fights parademons, and parademons can react to all the other Justice League members. So it's pretty definitive that Batman just scales to characters like Wonder Woman and Aquaman and Cyborg at the very least in speed. Superman and Flash at top speed would be a completely different story, but those three he should just scale to. And I mean, this happens in the comics all the time. That's just how it is, and that's how it's always going to be. Characters like Black Widow and Hawkeye, just regular people, but they can react to Thor, they can react to Hulk. It just is what it is, which at a low ball is going to be like sub-relativistic plus, which is already faster than what we detailed with the Spider-Man previously. So this version of Batman, he has these specialized gauntlets in the Snyder Cut that Alfred is able to make for him that are able to absorb energy. They are able to take heat vision blasts from Superman. This is resurrected Superman, who should be at bare minimum like multi-continental. If we want to say he needed some time to get back to full strength, he would still probably be around country level. So he's got extremely durable gauntlets, and then his massive skill advantage that he would have over all the Spider-Man as we just detailed. Batfleck is really in here doing a lot of heavy lifting.
To be honest, while Batfleck is attempting to fight the other three Spider-Men, Christian Bale and Robert Pattinson have been rendered red mist by the sheer shockwaves of their combat, more than likely. Obviously a bit hyperbolic, but those two, unfortunately, are not very relevant, even if you use things like the video games for the Nolanverse or the animated movie, and we look at the prequel novels for the Batman and so on. They simply aren't strong or fast enough to be rendered relevant, and while sure, being more skilled can somewhat close the gap in certain types of fiction. However, it's safe to say in this case, there's not really a skillful enough way to throw a punch that can close a gap that's nearly as big as 44 times, even using things like saying at a high end that the Christian Bale version of Batman scales to his explosive batarangs just for some reason. We actually have calculations that the pumpkin bomb in the first Spider-Man movie, using certain formulas, gets within the range of city block level, the energy required to destroy a city block. And not only does Tobey Maguire tank that attack in a heavily fatigued state, but so does Tom Holland, so does Andrew Garfield actually. All three of them tank a pumpkin bomb at pretty much close range in No Way Home towards the end. That would mean that the Spider-Men are 44 times stronger than the two Batmen at a low end, the Dark Knight and the Batman.
Like Crisis is detailed, there is a massive difference, a huge, insurmountable gap between the three Spider-Men. Each of them individually could easily take on the Batman and the Dark Knight in a 1v2 scenario. So it really comes down to just Batfleck turning on Ultimate Chad mode, going Super Saiyan, and fighting three Spider-Men at once, which of course I think would be the tallest task that he's ever had to undergo. Like I mentioned previously, he's got these gauntlets that can withstand any single strike by any of the Spider-Men. With his speed advantage, he should, again, just be able to block every single one of their attacks without any issue. Of course, he is a master in hand-to-hand combat, so if he's able to relay such complicated information in a single sentence to another fighter, just imagine what is going on in his brain. It's like gotta be a constantly Jimmy Neutron brain blast going on in there. with just fight scenarios. None of them have ever taken a martial arts class. They're all very acrobatic and unpredictable, but I don't think they're just wild attacks, doing whatever feels right is going to surprise someone who's just so immensely skilled. It really just comes down to how could he possibly take these 3 Spider-Men down?
A lot of people are going to have a couple questions. They're going to say, well, it's just sort of plot that Batfleck is this strong. But to be honest, if you were to take either the Christian Bale version of the character or the Robert Pattinson version of the Batman, and you put them in a scenario where they simply have to be relevant to the Justice League in these crazy doomsday Steppenwolf fights, then yeah, you're more than likely going to end up with feats that would make either 2 of those characters pretty overpowered, but that just is the case pretty consistently. Again, there's like 3 feats where he just straight up scales to these characters in terms of speed. Heat vision is detailed in the DC extended universe as being at the speed of light. Definitely pretty crazy and out there once you listen to it for the first time, but he just sort of necessarily has to be at this level for him to contribute at all to any of these fights or any of these stories that he's been put in. And the same probably could be said for the other 2 Batmen. Again, if there was a Justice League in Christian Bale's universe or so on, unfortunately, that simply is not the case. And a lot of people too, they're going to hear about the speed gap and they're going to wonder, well, hey, doesn't Spider-Man have precognition? Or how could anybody possibly be faster? How could you be saying Batman is faster? But the thing is, think about what precognition is. All it really boils down to is it's giving you more sensory information to rely on ahead of time. You know the state of things in advance to the actions being committed. Now, in BVS, Batman in his heavy ass mech suit was able to sneak around all the way around Superman. And I understand he used a lead line grenade, which would certainly hinder Superman's ability to see, his sort of X-ray and supervision. However, we know that Superman's super senses extend to his hearing as well. He can hear Lois Lane screaming from God knows how far away he was and can filter out all these different noises throughout the city, throughout the planet. He has to respond to all these different scenarios, sort of, I imagine, like in Superman Returns, where he just sort of hovers in space and has to filter out all the sound. Batman was able to circumvent that and almost teleport behind the guy. Honestly, when it comes to dealing with these characters with sort of super senses, Batfleck has the feats in spades to say that Spider Sense is not going to be the deciding factor here. Now, we do have Tom Holland being able to halt strikes from Cole Obsidian. Cole Obsidian, of course, scales to the Hulkbuster Mark II. He's able to dent its helmet with just straight up strikes to the face. The Hulkbuster Mark I was able to scale to the Hulk in Age of Ultron. The Hulk in Avengers 1 was able to scale to Thor. Thor could shake the entire planet of Jotunheim in the first Thor movie, so on and so forth. It all comes back to Spider-Man. We get the Spider-Man at country levels of force behind their strikes. If it's just the canon version, which Zack Snyder has stated that Warner Brothers told him that the Snyder Cut was not canon to the DCEU, that it was the Whedon Cut, unfortunately, then that version of the character pretty much also gets, eventually caught despite being far faster and backhanded into unconsciousness. But if we give him the Snyder Cut gauntlets, we have him in sort of an awkward situation where he himself, with his punches and kicks and so on, he doesn't actually have the force required to hurt any of the 3 Spider-Men, despite being far faster and having gauntlets and the skill to keep up and endure a lot of their attacks. All he has to do is put his hand in front of his face or wherever they're punching to simply have them blocked by the gauntlets. There's no real win condition for Batman outside of that. Despite Batfleck proving to be the most powerful Batman among this group, I think he probably just eventually gets caught. Again, you have to consider that any single attack from the Spider-Man, whether it be a web bullet or a kick or a punch to any part of Batman's body besides his gauntlets, he's pretty much folding like a lawn chair. Again, Batman physically, despite his gauntlets, his actual physical body would still be scaling off that Batman versus Superman feat of destroying those concrete pillars, which again is around small building or 600 million joules compared to country levels of force, or even just city block. Again, going back to the pumpkin bomb scaling, that's 45 times of a difference.
You could super exaggerate Batfleck and be like, oh, well, he reacted to the Flash, right? He was able to catch the Flash and save him. His grapnel gun is able to catch the Flash. Batman is able to hold on to the grapnel gun with his grip and his big bicep. A paperclip moving at the speed of light would vaporize the planet. So planetary Batfleck.
Yeah, we can certainly take stuff out of context, use things that don't really make a lot of sense. The Iron Spider was able to kick around Thanos up. I guess he's as strong as Thanos. And then Doc Ock was able to tear apart the Iron Spider. Up, there we go. Whoop-de-doo. But being consistent and sound-minded, I think that Batfleck would eventually get tagged by 3 characters who, at a high end with speed, some people scale the speed of lightning closer to the speed of light, and obviously the Spider-Man were able to dodge it. There are some feats in the MCU, like a wounded Thanos reacting to Captain Marvel's photon beams. You could maybe argue that certain attacks from Iron Man would be the speed of light that would eventually scale to Spider-Man. Even Electro just straight up uses an arc reactor, so he kind of has a similar kit, at least fundamentally, compared to Iron Man. So
yeah, no, I mean, the Batmen really don't have a chance in hell, and I think a lot of people probably anticipated that coming into this video. I mean, Batman just loses more often than not. If we want to say, all right, let's take all these characters and let's make them relative in speed, let's make them somewhat relative in AP, then you have a much more interesting fight, and I think the Batmen have a much bigger advantage just based on their skill, their versatility, including all of their gadgets and whatnot. I think the Batmen probably win a fight if it's like equalized, just because they have so much more going for them, where the Spider-Men just have webs really and their spider sense.
a lot of people too consider Batman a master of prep time. However, in the case of all but Batfleck, funnily enough, we really don't ever see the other 2 versions of the character ever use prep or formulate plans, especially not against superhumans. I think certainly, again, Batfleck, if he were to have to prep against the Spider-Man, it would be pretty easy if we just want to say this is some outright comic book we're writing where Batman could maybe lure one of the Spider-Men into a building and then rig it to, pump gas into it, then yeah, he'd probably win via that. But just to strictly 3 people trying to beat up 3 other people, we're using the strengths as documented in their respective films and film series and speed and so on. The Spider-Men take it eventually. Batfleck is definitely going to be the last man standing of the Batman by far. Yeah, he's probably exactly what you thought, unfortunately. But I hoped you at least learned something about sort of the expanded material of all these characters, the weird tie-in novels and video games and so on and so forth.
Although I would love for the Batmen to win, at the end of the day, I think the Spider-Men are just more powerful overall and just have more going for them. Just based on being in a massive expanded universe where they can scale to a bunch of other characters. I think we got it right. Let us know down in the comments. Thanks, Crisis, for having me on.
Of course, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.